All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Nasia Safdar. I'm the faculty director for multi-site investigator-initiated clinical trials, and delighted to welcome you all to the clinical trials community of practice today. We have Dr. Loren Denlinger as our speaker today. Loren is a pulmonologist, scientist, and the inaugural William W. and Judith H. Bussey Endowed Professor of Allergy and Asthma Research. As many of you know, he also serves as the Vice Chair of Clinical and Translational Research for the Department of Medicine. His research has focused on risk factors for and mechanisms of recovery from asthma exacerbations and the use of challenge studies to better understand exacerbation pathophysiology, while biomarker and therapeutic development are the end goals of his research. Dr. Denlinger has nearly 20 years of experience in asthma clinical research and participates in the NHLBI Asthma Clinical Research Network and the AsthmaNet Network for Clinical Trials. He has served in multiple leadership roles within his field, is currently the principal investigator for the Great Lakes Partnership within PRECISE Severe Asthma Clinical Trial, as well as for the Severe Asthma Research Program. He has had additional NIH R01 funding, as well as past core project support. And I'll just summarize by saying that Loren is eminently qualified to be our speaker for today's clinical trial seminar, and we're looking forward to all his wisdom and insights. Thank you, Loren.
Thank you, Nasia. That's an awesome introduction. Let me share my slides here. And there, is that the right one? Are you guys seeing the presentation mode?
We are seeing it. It looks good.
Great. Okay.
Go to the next one. I'll just remind people
there we go.
that for those of you who are thinking about multi-site research, we do have a number of networks that are supported through ICTR that you can contact, and the contact information is at the bottom. Winner is one. So Winner is the 4 largest healthcare providers in the state. The idea is to do multi-site trials that are of high priorities to all these healthcare provider networks. And so if you reach out to us, we can give you more detail on that. There is also March, which is the Midwest Consortium. Over a half a dozen institutions are part of March, and then ICTR offers a central coordinating service. So investigator-initiated multi-site research, think about these resources as being available to you. I will turn it back over to you, Loren.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I got to advance from there. Okay, so I thought I would include a disclosure slide. So I do a little consulting with a company called Pharma. My research is funded primarily by grants. However, there are a number of companies that donate drug for our asthma network studies, and those are listed here. None of those will be discussed today. So today's objectives are simple. Hopefully we all recognize the value of clinical trials, but I'll provide some information that will help expand that, hopefully. We'll give you some basic training information and advice to join a study team if you're a new investigator out there. Hopefully we'll appreciate the importance of centralized feasibility assessment, which is coming soon. And then I'll talk about resources for principal investigators hoping to start a new trial. So who benefits from clinical trials? Well, certainly the participants do. They get to access the latest interventions and technology. In addition to that, there's standardized care. They get disease-specific education, and there's an element of hope as well that all participants get. And there's a notion that even patients who are assigned to the placebo arm actually have benefit too. So this is a meta-analysis of studies, I believe 186 trials in 23 countries, spanning 18 conditions and over 16,000 patients. And the inclusion to get into this meta-analysis was simple, that there had to be 3 arms at least in the study, including an observation arm. And that way, the team was able to actually measure the placebo effect over and above the no treatment effect. And the stunning thing is that about half of the overall treatment effect was attributed to contextual, meaning some of that was from natural history and some of that came from placebo. And so it drives home the point that even if you get randomized to a placebo arm, you're likely to be doing better than you would be on simple observation. So who else benefits from clinical trials? Well, clearly the institution benefits from referrals and provider recruitment and retention. I would argue that providers benefit too, and it gives providers who are participating and referring to clinical trials, I think, a sense of wellness. And then I'll show another slide in just a minute. All patients receiving care at an institution that values trials also benefit from that. And I've actually co-opted the Wisconsin idea and put it out there that I will not be satisfied until every patient at UW Health has the opportunity to participate in clinical research. So what about benefit for patients who just come to a hospital that does clinical trials? So this is a large study, a coronary artery disease study, 172,000 patients in the Crusade network hospitals. There were 123 hospitals who were large enrollers in the high enrollment group, and then 145 hospitals who didn't have any trials at all at their hospital, and then a middle group in between here that were the low enrollers. And this is mortality after having non-STEMI care. And you can see the high enroller group is a significant reduction in the mortality. Here's the really interesting thing. This data came from all the patients cared for at their hospital, not just the ones who were in the trial, and only 3% of their patient population was in the study. So it just speaks to the importance of standardized care and how having a trial in your institution or in your department just opens awareness about what can you do better as a clinician and how can you provide the state-of-the-art level care. So certainly the institution has recognized the value of clinical trials, and this is actually part of the strategic plan that the campus and UW Health partnered with. We're now getting into the senior years of this plan, and I'm very confident that it will be in the next version. The 4 pillars of that plan are to increase ease of access to trials, to standardize the processes for that, to increase quality control, and to change the culture at our clinical sites. Certainly, clinical trials are a cornerstone of the efforts going on at East Park, which will be opening up in the next year or so. And I'm really excited to share the launching of the Clinical Trials Institute with Dr. Safdar and Betsy Nugent leading this group. And this is their website. For those who have been around a while at UW, this is the new home and title for what used to be called the Office of Clinical Trials, and then more recently, the Clinical Research Office. So clinical trials are important. If you are new to this and are interested in some basic training, we'll cover that next. So certainly, good place to start for any investigator is with city training. I mean, you need it to be on IRB protocol, and that's a good place to get going. There's lots of training at ICTR, whether you just take a few courses or certificates or go all the way and get a degree. That this is really ICTR's strength in terms of getting new investigators ready to be part of this. CTI has got trial operations learning opportunities, and I think there's some learning modules in development, although Nasia can maybe speak to that at the end because there's some question marks there on my slide. Certainly, ask around locally, your division chief or your department chair, is there a study team in your local area that you can help with? Maybe not as principal investigator, but maybe starting out as a sub-investigator, or just providing a service. I think there are several examples of high-performing teams that have study physician on-call teams to help share physical exams, consent questioning, things like that, that allows the coordinators to schedule patients into their study without having to wait for the PI to come back from clinic or get away from their Zoom or come back from their travel. So the nice thing about this from a learner's perspective is you certainly get protocol specific training. You get to interact with research coordinators, many of whom are certified in these big teams. So you learn about protocol management from a hands-on perspective. There's hopefully a growing effort to recognize this service with financial incentives at the division or department level. That's a work in progress. And I provide some examples of teams that do exist out there. Obviously, they're mostly in the Department of Medicine, but certainly the allergy asthma study team has this model. The hospitalist launched this type of study call model for the COVID trials. We've been doing this in the ICU, and certainly the Cancer Center has study teams for this role as well. It's a great place to learn the basics of being a clinical trialist. Yeah, I would argue the best way to learn about clinical trials is having the opportunity to participate in a federal or a foundation-sponsored trial network. I've been fortunate to do this in the context of asthma. There are several other types of trial networks around the institution. I don't know of all these, so please ask locally to see if there's one in your specialty area. But in the best of cases, you get access to the protocol design phase. So you're learning how to put the trial together. There's often a centralized training effort for the coordinators, so new investigators can participate in that. And that certainly incorporates all of the protocol activation steps that will make or break the data quality and launch efficiency. There's often investigator resources for learning in these training activities as well. From a junior person's perspective, these networks often have ancillary study opportunities for secondary analysis of big data sets, which is a huge boost to your career if you can get a paper out of that. And it also certainly is a great way to put together a robust career development plan for K-23 or other career development awards. So again, I don't know our institutional portfolio, so to speak, of these, but ask your division chief or department chair about local opportunities to get involved in a network. So if you're a clinician in the audience, even just the act of referring patients to trials is a huge way to help. So again, start locally, listen to your division or department updates about trials that are opening up in your neck of the woods. Think about just a very simple statement to help with, selling the idea of a trial to patient. There's a lot of direct to patient marketing of these trials sometimes, and you may be in a visit with them and they say, have you heard about trial X? And just saying, oh, I don't know much about that trial, but I know our institution values clinical trials, and I think this is an important part of high quality care. That statement alone can go a long way to increasing patient confidence in participating. Certainly, UW Health has a study finder, and I provide the website there. It's also easily findable on the Clinical Trials Institute website. So another way to help refer patients is to actually participate in somewhat of almost a pre-consent discussion to them. Toby Campbell within the Department of Medicine, Heme and Oncology Division and Palliative Care really took this to an amazing level and developed a communication tool called Trial Talk. I've got a link here to a video. It's about a 15-minute video to learn how to use this thing. It's depicted here, and the deliverable is that it sets up a conversation that you have with the patient in real time, and they take home a piece of paper that highlight what are the options at this point, what are the potential treatment options, And what are the chances to have a positive outcome after you've delivered some news? I mean, clearly this example is designed for oncology, but I think there are numerous disease states where we have to deliver bad news to patients from time to time, and we might not have great options. And so this allows for shared decision making, which is a goal that I think many of us share. So this is a perhaps more explicit example of this, and again, I refer you to that training video, but you know, it gives you the opportunity to say in basic terms what's wrong. You know, in this case, there's incurable disease. You know, what are the goals of the patient? Do they want to stay at home and focus on palliation, or do they want to keep fighting? And what does that look like in terms of standard therapies? Providing details about the impact to the patient is really important in this section. And then in the treatment area of this graphic, naming the actual treatments can sometimes make a big difference. And giving, you know, your best guess of how well the standard of care is going to work and how long it's going to work. With comparisons for, you know, what's going to happen with, in this case, palliative care, or what could happen in a clinical trial, and you know, acknowledge that we don't know. It's a trial, but there's hope. So I have tried it out in my asthma clinic, and it takes some preparation time in advance, but I have found it to be very impactful, especially when that patient can take that piece of paper home and think about what they want to do and talk about it with their family. So we talked about basics and the importance of joining a team. I'll talk next about feasibility assessment and the importance of doing this centrally. So for any trial, there are a number of phases in its life cycle. Certainly, you know, there's the opportunity when it presents to you, whether it's coming at you from a industry-sponsored trial opportunity. Maybe you ran into a study rep at a meeting, for example, or a funding announcement for a grant. There's, you know, a feasibility review process. Can we do this at the institution or at the local level? What about the contracting and regulatory phase? You got to get your protocols approved by the IRB and the DSMB, and there's a contracting phase to make sure that everybody's whole from a finance perspective. After the protocol is approved, there's what I call a protocol activation phase. And a lot of this is you know, the logistical heart of getting things going. So certainly there's forms and database creation. There's creating an encore calendar, which is important to keep the billing separate from the patient's insurance billing. There may be institutional resource planning, like the Pharmacy Research Center or the Clinical Research Unit. You know, how robust is the recruitment plan? Does the study come with visit checklist and source docs for the coordinators? And there may be manuals of procedure depending on how complex the study endpoints are. There may be things in that area. So these elements, you know, make or break the efficiency of how the trial is rolled out. And then clearly, once you get going, you got to enroll patients and get the study completed. So you know, with any pipeline process, there's often a pain point or a pinch point, and at least currently at UW, I think it's in the protocol activation phase. So we get lots of opportunities. We do a reasonable job at feasibility review. The contracting phase sometimes takes longer than you hope for, and the IRB phase sometimes takes longer than you hope for. Although we're much better at participating in seeding to a central IRB or participating as a central IRB. Often, as I mentioned, protocol activation is a pinch point, and then hopefully with a robust recruitment plan, the study execution phase can go a little bit more slowly. So having all the key stakeholders at the table during this feasibility review process is really helpful to make smart decisions. Sometimes it means you have to say no to some studies that may otherwise be attractive to the principal investigator. If it just takes too many resources to get it done, it's not going to be efficient when you get to study execution. And then certainly having a team approach to this, from the coordinator and the study physician standpoint really helps with a smooth execution in the that phase of the trial. So moving UW as an institution towards accreditation for clinical trials is one of the missions of the Clinical Trial Institute, led by Betsy and Nasia. And I'm free ad-libbing here, so Nasia can correct me at the end. But some of the needs assessment that went into this many years ago now included a need for standardized training for research coordinators, a need for process refinement to enhance readiness for external audits from sponsors or the FDA. We needed to improve the IRB efficiency, and that process has now concluded perhaps a year or two ago now, and it is making a difference. We needed to upgrade the clinical trial management software, and the institution has now moved to a single instance of Encore, for example. And we need to invest in some of the resources. I mentioned the Pharmacy Research Center and the CRU. Those resources are important investments for the institution. So historically, feasibility reviews have been done at the department level. There is a new committee opening up early this summer called the UW Research Operations Committee. Betsy and Nasia will lead this. I've been asked to serve as a member, and that will bring all of the key stakeholders from an institutional resource perspective to these discussions, and hopefully lead to a very efficient but also meaningful review of feasibility. And I've heard in talking with Kurt Zimmerman that the timeline to apply for accreditation is hopefully by the end of 2025. So we have a lot of work to go to standardize things, but I think getting us accredited as a clinical trial site will be a very important milestone. So the last phase of the talk then, how about resources for principal investigators? So certainly ICTR is a center of learning and a center of mentoring. As I discussed previously, you can develop an individualized career development plan. There's a whole collection of workshops, courses, certificates and degrees, protocol writing, and a protocol development program now. Certainly today is a good example of the community practice seminar series. And ICTR is a great resource for faculty who want to eventually attain independent funding from federal sponsors. So what if you're in the audience and you already have a little bit of clinical trial experience, maybe as a co-investigator or a sub-investigator, and you want to take the next step? Well, certainly ICTR and CTI frequently get requests for site participations in both NIH and industry-sponsored trials. If you're in the Department of Medicine, please let me know about those interests and the Office of Research Services, and we can help direct those opportunities to you. I think there's a resource at ICTR for that, and Teresa and Leanne are good people to start with. Maybe Teresa can fill in and correct me about that at the end. So where do you go for help? Sometimes the alphabet soup of this institution is confusing, and the institution is changing rapidly too. So sometimes we have old acronyms for groups and offices that don't exist anymore. So I have this slide and the next slide highlights some of the trial phases, and I want to contrast two different types of trials. So in a prior slide, I talked about a federal or foundation sponsored network as the best place to learn about clinical trials. So I would call out industry design and sponsored trials as the second best way to learn about running a trial. And industry trials have somewhat of a cookie cutter approach. And what do I mean by that? Well, pharmaceutical companies are in the business of doing clinical trials. They have templates for each of the steps, and they just hand them to CTI. And our job is to just activate that or operationalize that. So the tempo here is much faster often. So site selection and activation can happen within a few weeks. It's really amazing. Protocol activation can also be fast, depending on how intense the resource needs are and the training complexity, especially for the PRC or the CRU. Launching the recruitment plan, might be variable. Sometimes there's a specific budget item for recruitment, and in some cases even centralized recruitment support from web interfaces or social media or other ways that would be independent of our institution, but could benefit your recruitment plan. Oftentimes, however, it's up to the PI, and in the old way of doing things, it was just kind of passive recruitment out of the PI's clinic, and that is not the most efficient way to recruit for any study. So I highlight CTI, but also the Clinical Research Data Service within ICTR is a really smart way to leverage the power of the electronic medical record to build a smart recruitment plan. So what about visit completion and invoicing? That's really dependent on the pace of your recruiting. CTI is really good at that, and closeout can be really fast because the pharmaceutical companies often are motivated to clean up the data and get it analyzed so that they can decide, do they move on to the next step, or in some cases, do they have enough information to present to the FDA? So in contrast, I'll have this slide covering investigator-initiated trials. I would argue these can be the most difficult way to learn about running a trial, and I would caution new investigators of starting here. You might want to get some industry experience first. These are best supported by research teams that are well aligned with departmental or divisional programs. And if you're a PI that doesn't have direct clinical access to the intended study population, make sure you spend enough time with engaging clinical partners who do have your study population, because you can't assume that they're going to help you just because you have a cool idea. So similar phases of your study. So with an investigator-initiated, perhaps the slowest of these is the grant and the protocol development phase. Often this can be very slow, spanning a year or two if there's a review and resubmit cycle after study section. ICTR is a great resource for this. So there's the MedRamp program for pre-award support and team building. There's the protocol development program. And if you want to do your trial at multiple sites, we saw an advertisement at the beginning of this deck for the multi-site research networks. Protocol activation, can be slow, depending on, and also has feasibility review. The tough part is if the staff who are tasked with, the Encore calendar or the source document builds or the database builds, if they weren't involved in the grant development, that's going to take some time and some money, and hopefully that's accounted for in the budgeting process. But I know of some examples in the past where it wasn't, and led to delays and surprises. CTI can help with that, but again, they're not necessarily involved in the early phases of development, and so it may take them some time to do this. Like the prior slides, the recruitment plan and the success of that launch is variable, depends on the budget to support recruiting. And ICTR has got lots of resources to help you build an efficient recruitment plan. In contrast to industry-sponsored studies, the investigator-initiated ones often have a slow closeout phase, and there's no external pressure to get these studies completed, and so that can be a disadvantage from an institutional resource perspective. I think I have one more slide and then start to summarize. So what are the questions you might want to ask yourself or your study team if you're interested in building an effective recruitment plan? So what is the expected pace of accrual of subjects? What's the target number of patients that you want to enroll in your site? And this is often spelled out in the contract. What is the time of expected enrollment? Or how long does the grant support end? If you know these two variables, you can estimate a number of patients enrolled per month or per quarter or whatever increment that you want, and use that as a benchmark. Are you enrolling at pace or below that pace? And certainly data monitoring committees or DSMBs will look at that pace of accrual to see if your site is performing or not. I think this will also be a benchmark in the feasibility review process, from what I've been told. If you've done similar trials in the past and you did not enroll at, say, 60% of your target over the course of the study, that might be something that is taken into consideration in terms of whether you'll get permission to open up a similar trial. Who are the stakeholders for the trial? Do you have access to that patient population? Do you need to engage partners from the practice provider plan? The patients themselves are important stakeholders for many trials, and some advanced designs and certainly those funded by PCORI, for example, actually require some engagement with patient groups or advocacy groups to make sure that the design of the trial is matching their hopes and expectations. Have you accounted for diversity, and how do you modify your recruitment plan to maximize inclusion? What do you expect the screen to enrolled ratio? How many patients do you have to present this opportunity to in order to enroll one? The number that I sort of keep in the back of my head is about 5 to 1. And if I'm going above 5 patients to enroll one, I'm starting to think, what can we do better? Or is this a trial opportunity that maybe we should say no to? Will you need help from the electronic medical record system? There are a lot of tools out there for recruitment now. MyChart, even best practice alerts, certainly data pulls for patient lists, for direct marketing activities, even as simple as letters. I've been really amazed for some of the studies that I've been involved with, how effective these tools can be. So there are lots of opportunities to learn about recruitment. ICTR hosted a workshop back in February, and I'm guessing they'll probably redo this at some point, but it's focused around 2 hours, focused around recruitment strategies for clinical trials. So the Clinical and Health Informatics Institute, or chi-squared, is certainly the ICTR website has a link to them. This is led by Jamal Matthew, and can help you build a list of potentially eligible patients, and also can help with database builds or other advanced recruitment strategies. And then UW Health certainly has a marketing team, and occasionally they'll allow for clinical trial marketing, billboards or flyers or mailings or other things. Certainly lots of other resources for recruitment, but I thought I'd list at least a few here. So to summarize, and then I'll turn things open to questions. So hopefully I've convinced you that having the availability of clinical trials at an institution improves clinical care, even if the patients are not involved in the trial themselves. I'd encourage you, if you're a new investigator, to join a team to learn the basics. Centralized feasibility review is important and will be necessary to enhance efficiency of all trials. and not just those coming from the bigger teams. And then there's lots of resources for principal investigators. In general, if you're wanting help for grant and protocol development, go to ICTR. If you're more in need of trial operations in terms of coordinator support and things like that, budget negotiations, things like that, go to CTI. With that, I'll close. Thank you for your attention. I think there's one more slide of announcements, and I'll turn things back to Nasia and then open it up to questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Loren. Wonderful talk. Really appreciate all the practical advice. Our next community of practice will be this fall, but just inviting anyone from the audience, if you have ideas for speakers that you know of that you'd like to invite, please contact Teresa to let them know and she can make the contact for you. Let's see, do we have questions? I'm just going to check the chat. People can either post their questions in chat or just unmute yourself and ask your question. While people are thinking, Loren, maybe I can start by just asking if there was something that you would do differently. You know, a lot of us are just thrown into clinical trials and you do what you can in the moment. But if you had some time to think, what would you do differently compared to how it turned out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I didn't fully embrace clinical trials, you know, myself up front. I was involved with them early on, but I still kind of had my basic scientist hat on in terms of thinking about what I wanted to do when I grew up. Maybe that was, how should I say, a bias of me being on the tenure track and you know, the concern about how you know, team science is undervalued when it comes to tenure review. But I think if I were to do something different, I think if making that decision, you want to do clinical trials early on, really can, how should I say, enhance your efficiency of learning. It took me a while to feel comfortable doing this, but I you know, reflecting on that, I think I wasn't fully engaged at the beginning.
Great, thank you very much. I think your point about, you know, joining a team, it allows you to learn while not putting such pressure on you that you feel like, you know, you can't do anything else. So I would really echo that and encourage people to join existing structures, and there's plenty of room for new questions and new trials, but that existing machine can really help get that going. So let's see, we do have a question. Kate Judge, one challenge for clinicians in terms of engaging in clinical trials is related to limited dedicated time for scholarship and writing. Are there asynchronous ways to participate in teams?
Yeah, that's a great, in some ways loaded question. I mean, certainly the financial support for clinical trials is and investigator time is somewhat challenging. We're the institution, I think, is lobbying for changing some of that, although there's certainly you know, how do you protect effort for faculty who are on the clinical track or the CHS track for clinical trials is a local, you know, decision ultimately, because it can affect your compensation. You know, the asynchronous opportunities. So I didn't talk about this as in terms of design trial, how should I say, styles. Trial design, that's not maybe the right word, but one of the types of clinical trials that's growing in popularity are called remote decentralized trials, which are often pragmatic types of questions, you know, comparing efficacy of one treatment to another that's already approved. those can be done where the patient is in the community and doesn't come to traditional academic center for their consent conversation. You utilize video health types of platforms for the coordinator to do the consent conversation, and then maybe the physician effort might be a little bit more asynchronous in that case. I know of at least one of those trial opportunities came across my desk recently, and it really was eye-opening in terms of thinking, how would our workflow be different? And I do think that once we embrace them as a trial community, that there might be the way for asynchronous effort to engage more investigators. Hopefully not.
Thanks, Loren.
Hopefully not during pajama time, though.
That was very helpful. I think, from the standpoint of participating in the writing up of a clinical trial and the results, those opportunities exist with investigator initiated, but typically not for industry sponsored trials where they are handling the data and the write up. For investigator initiated trials, one thing to clarify would be, the role of the individual, especially for a clinician. What is it that makes the clinician critical to the team? Certainly it could be their writing, but more often it's because of their clinical acumen and their ability to recruit and their ability to portray the trial in a way that the patient understands and decides, and their relationship with the patient. So those are the things to use clinicians for. And I think having a shared folder where everybody is editing the same manuscript, and then a focused communication to the clinician saying, these are the 2 lines we really need your insight on, which still gives them credit for the work and everything they've done, but allows it to not be something so overwhelming that because it's not their day job essentially. So just something to think about, but I'm sure there's other challenges there too. Let's see, Kelly Miller says, how did you find a mentor for clinical trial involvement?
Yeah, I think, that's where, talking to your local administrator or, chair or chief is really helpful. These folks know, your area well and who's doing what. And so if you're a junior person and just, maybe just came from another institution, getting to know the faculty, outside of your immediate practice area can be a challenge. And so, I would love it if we had more of what I would call a relational database, where you could just plug in, I'm interested in, disease such and such and clinical trials, and it would say, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. We don't quite have that yet, but I think it would be an important resource if we did have that.
Thanks, Loren. So along the same line, the question is, ideas on how to get junior investigators more involved early on in their careers. We think a lot, don't hear about them. Allergy is great about getting fellows involved, physical exams, etc. But how to involve residents and med students?
Yeah, I think so to maybe expand on that, so that the allergy fellowship program for many years has had all the fellows participate in that study physician call pool for a half a day a week, when they don't have clinical duties, we support that with a learning conference. So I believe at least once a quarter, maybe sometimes a little bit more often, there's a teaching conference about the clinical trials. So not only is there the service commitment of helping with the physical exams and consent discussion, but there's a learning opportunity for investigators. And I think obviously different training programs have different clinical burdens, and so that might not work for all departments or divisions. But I think the earlier you can get folks involved in their training, the better, before taking on all of the responsibilities of being a new faculty member.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Last call for questions for people. Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask it if you'd rather not put in chat, or chat is fine too. All right, not seeing other questions. Loren, thank you again so very much. And thank you to our participants as well for joining. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.